Okay, Wally, whenever you're ready.
All right, good morning, good Erev Shabbos. During Shavuos, of course, the key Kriyas Torah was the Aseret Hadibros, and one of the key commandments that we're told to observe is to stay away from Avodah Zarah. Obviously, the introduction of monotheism into the world was a major, major contribution, considering the fact that the majority of the world at that time, and perhaps even now in some places, were idolaters. They worshipped idols, they worshipped trees, they worshipped different parts of nature, animals, stars, planets. What I wanted to explore is really, through the eyes of the Rambam and others, what is Avodah Zarah? How can an intelligent person worship an animal and believe that that animal controls their destiny in the world, or a tree, or even an idol? What does it mean to be an Oved Avodah Zarah? And this commandment is repeated many, many times in the Torah. So one of the key definitions in my mind of Avodah Zarah, and I think the Rambam refers to this directly, if you believe that the idol that you are worshiping, that idol, that statue, that tree, that animal, can actually control events, can actually control things, that is a key element of Avodah Zarah. That is idolatry. Idolatry means you worship the idol believing that the idol has power. Or that, now, we know, for example, that the moon does exert certain pull over the oceans and the seas. So the moon has power. Scientifically, you can explain it, but people were aware of this. So it's not too far of an extension that if the moon has certain power, then the stars have power, then the planets have power, then the constellations have power to actually influence events and do things. And since they are heavenly bodies, they must control things. On a simpler level, if you have a panther or a lion or a tiger that are powerful animals that rule the animal kingdom to a certain extent, they must have power too. Ancient cavemen worshipped the bear, because where they lived in certain parts of Europe, the bear was the major dominant animal. So we all know the famous medrash with Avraham and Terach. When Avraham came to the realization that there is a God, an invisible God that is all powerful, that exerts control over the universe, he came into conflict with his father Terach, because Terach was an idol manufacturer and he had a good business. So Avram broke all of the idols and put the hammer in the hand of the biggest idol. Terach came and said, "What's going on?" And Avram said, "Well, that idol wanted to be dominant and broke all the other idols." And his father said, "Don't be absurd. An idol doesn't have that. An idol can't do anything. So why do people worship idols?" So here is the issue that we're dealing with today. You have Christianity, and it takes many forms. Roman Catholicism and Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox, they have statues. They worship these statues, and they pray to these statues. They pray. Now, do they actually believe that the statue itself has power to do something, or that it represents something that they're praying to? And there, of course, is a big difference. If you worship a statue of the Virgin Mary and you pray to the Virgin Mary and you ask her to do something, if you believe that statue can really do it, that's Avodah Zarah. If you're praying to a statue but understand it's only a representation, it may not be Avodah Zarah. Depends on how sophisticated you are in your theological beliefs. Now, you can make an argument that most Christians are not that theologically sophisticated, and many worship the idols, the saints, Many churches have what they call reliquaries. A reliquary is a box of bones of a saint. They bury a saint, they wait until the body is totally disintegrated, then they dig it up again, and they put their bones in these special boxes, and then they put it in their worship, so to speak, these bones of the saints. In Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox, they have pictures that they parade around of the saints that they pray to. So the question is Christianity in its various forms today considered avodah zarah? And then, of course, when Islam came on the scene, is Islam considered avodah zarah? Now, technically, the word avodah zarah means strange worship. So anything other than worshiping HaKadosh Baruch Hu is technically avodah zarah. You're worshiping something other than Hashem. That's avodah zarah. In the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, you had people that were idol worshippers. You had Zoroastrians. You had pagan, the different deities, the Greek and Roman idols in their temples. The whole many different gods. The god of the sea, the god of war, the god of fertility, the god of. They worship all these statues. Today, there are a few areas today where these halachos still apply. For example, if the idol worshiper touches your wine, that renders that wine unfit to be used. If it's not mavushal wine, and the more expensive wines are not mavushal. That's why at all catered events, when you have the waiters serving the wine is all mavushal, so you don't have a problem with that. If Christianity or Islam or some of the other religions are considered avodah zarah, then you can't drink the wine that they would serve you if it was not mavushal wine. The other issue is, and we'll get to this in a moment, is we have to avoid avodah zarah whenever possible. There are most of the art in the Middle Ages was Christian-themed art. Pictures of Jesus and pictures of the saints or the angels. So very, very Christian-oriented, most of the art in the Middle Ages. One very well-known posek was very opposed, for example, to boys taking art classes, even at yeshiva. Because when you study medieval art, the great artists all painted Christian art. Can you go to a museum that has Christian art and observe that? Can you go into what used to be a church, which has great art? For example, the cloisters in the inward section of Manhattan, the tip of Manhattan. The cloisters is part of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And it's a cathedral that was brought over from Italy brick by brick. And it's a beautiful, beautiful building. It houses great works of art, but it also functions occasionally as a church. People have services there. Can you go to the cloisters to look at the artwork? Can you go to the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican and observe the great artwork? Look at Michelangelo's wonderful painting on the ceiling, which is essentially a Christian painting. Most of the art in Europe is Christian themed. How does that fit into the prohibitions against having to distance yourself from avodah zarah? I mean, the Mishnah and the Gemara are full of examples. If there's a city that has idols at the entranceway, you shouldn't go into the city that way. To avoid idols at whatever cost. You shouldn't live in a city, if you can avoid it, that has idols posted all over the place. And in the ancient world, even today, there's a very famous statue outside of Brazil called Christ of the Andes. It's a huge statue. Tremendous. And it sits on top of a mountain. You can't miss it. Every airplane sees it. Every ship that goes in to the port. Many cities have this. Can you fly that way? Can you enter that house? I mean, we're told to avoid avodah zarah whenever possible. Can you walk by a church? Can you cross the street? These are all halakhic issues. Uh, Again, the Rishonim go into great detail. I want to go to all the pratim of going into a city, avoiding a street where there, and so forth and so on. The question today, two questions today. I mean, I can't speak. There are many, many religions in the world today. I can't speak knowledgeably about the religions of the Far East, Shintoism. I'm not sure exactly what all these religions do. I don't know if there's idols involved. I don't think so. They have temples. Buddhism has idols. Obviously, you have the idol of Buddha, but some of the other Near Eastern, Far Eastern religions don't have statues. But predominantly, Islam and Christianity are the two major religions. And the poskim talk about it. Is Christianity today considered avodah zarah? Is Islam today considered avodah zarah? And it's a machlokas, really. The easier one to talk about is Islam. Many poskim, including contemporary poskim, would hold that it's permissible to enter a mosque because there's nothing in a mosque. I've been in a mosque. There is nothing there. The only thing you find in a mosque, just like we have a chart that what time is Sofsman, Kriya Shema, what time is Mincha, they have a chart telling you the 5 times a day when you have to daven. So that you have in a mosque. Other than that, there's no statuary. It's just a plain building. The women daven behind the men. They have their prayer rugs. But other than that, there's no, and many contemporary Israeli poskim hold that it's perfectly permissible to go into a mosque. Why you want to go in there is a separate reason. But there's nothing in a mosque that would conflict. There are 1 or 2 poskim who say you shouldn't do it. Because it's, again, avodah zarah literally means strange worship. Zar, strange, other than Jews. So any worship other than Judaism is considered zara, strange. So for that reason alone, perhaps you ought not to go into a mosque. Churches, on the other hand, are a different story. Because churches are full of statues. And statues, again, it's representation. Do I think that most Christians today believe that the statues they're praying to actually have power? I don't think so. Which is why the Meiri stands out among Rishonim that says that Christianity today is not avodah zarah, because nobody believes the statue itself has power. On the other hand, there might be some unsophisticated people who actually believe that statues have power, and they're not sophisticated enough philosophically in their thinking to understand that they're praying to a representation of what that statue is. So most Rishonim would tell you that Christianity today, whether it's Roman Catholicism or whether it's Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox, these are considered by most poskim today to be avodah zarah. On the other hand, Protestantism is a different category, because Protestants, by nature, don't have statues in their churches. Most Protestant denominations, and there are many. I remember Rabbi Lapp, Oliver Shalom, who was the chief chaplain in the army. They would have these meetings of chaplains, of chief chaplains in Washington, D.C. once a year. And there'd be 1 Catholic chaplain and 1 Jewish chaplain and 33 Protestant chaplains, because there are so many different sects and denominations, and a Muslim. And there are so many different sects in Protestantism. And most of the Protestant churches, with the exception of 1 or 2, the high end, the Episcopalians and the other group, they may have some statues. But most Protestant churches are devoid of statuary, because Protestants means they protest, they were against the Trinity, so they don't have statues. And I had a situation once, Ma'aseh Shahaya, many years ago. Bergen County had a program for Yom HaShoah at the county hall in Hackensack. That's the what do they call it? The county seat in Hackensack. And there were chairs set up. It was a whole, on the lawn. It was a whole big program, and I was one of the speakers. And it started to rain. was an outdoor program, so they couldn't have. So what did they do? Across the street from City Hall, there's a church, a Protestant church. So they moved everything indoors into the church. So my dilemma was, even though I was a speaker on the program and it was raining, can I go into the church? So I went in for two reasons. A, because there were no statues in the church. It was a Protestant church. And B, I didn't want to cause a Chilul Hashem saying, he won't go into the Protestant church. So I went in. But if it would have been a Catholic church, I don't know if I would have been able to go in. But going into a Protestant church, again, if it could be going into any other denominational building is problematic if you can avoid it. The question is, museums, artwork. There is in Yerushalayim, in what's that section called? Blanking out. But there's a museum, the Muslim Museum of Art in Yerushalayim, and it's all Muslim art. Can you go in there? It's not Christian art; it's Muslim art. Can you go into that museum, even though the museum is dedicated to Islamic religion, depicted in art? Given the fact that they hold that it was Yishmael, not Yitzchak, that was at the Akedah, plus other stuff, can you go in there? It's an interesting question. Again, contemporary poskim are divided. They're much more lenient when it comes to Islam than they are in terms of churches. Muslims bow down to the Prophet Muhammad, but they don't consider him divine. But they do bow down to him. The Rambam classically holds that since Muslims are not idol worshippers, their wine does not become yayin nesach. And again, he lived in a Muslim country, and he was very lenient when it comes to that. They believe in God. They believe in God, even though their religion is wrong and how they believe, they're not considered Ovdei Avodah Zarah. So, and there's a lot of discussion about a person who was a Ben Noach. There was people who observed the Sheva Mitzvahs Bnei Noach. Is a prohibition against Avodah Zarah apply to them as well? Can you convert a mosque into a shul? Interesting question. And again, there are some poskim who say yes. We have a situation. What about can a church become a shul? If a church has been people moved out of the community and the church is decrepit, you want to buy a building. What usually happens in situations like that is the church is sold to a third party, and then the people who want to build a shul buy it from the third party. Which is the same thing that happens when the shul unfortunately dies and the neighborhood changes, and the only people that want to buy the shul are a church or a church group. You can't sell a shul to become a church. So what they usually sell it to a third party, and that third party sells it to the church. Whether that's right or not, this is what people do. The Tzitz Eliezer, a contemporary posek, great posek, follows the Ran that Islam is considered avodah zarah, and he says you can't go into a mosque. On the other hand, Rav Nissim says that Islam is not considered avodah zarah. There are no statues. And other posts can follow that. Can you go through a park that has statues of Christian saints in it, or a courtyard? Can you vote? And this is a question that Moshe Feinstein dealt with. During elections, many voting stations are in churches, not in the church sanctuary itself, but in a basement or in a side room. Can you enter a church to vote? And he paskins yes, because in the room where you're going to vote, there's no statuary. Again, if you can avoid it, yes, but if it's not being used for worship, you can go into it. Can a yeshiva rent a room in a church? Again, not recommended. A lot of interesting questions. A more frequent question that comes up is there are many Catholic hospitals. And if you are a patient in a hospital and there's a cross on the wall, is it permissible to go into that room? And if you can't always cover it, it'd be problematic. Interesting questions that come up.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So I have a question. Isn't there, by doing like the Isur of going into a church or somewhere where there would be statues for that particular religion, by emphasizing the don't go in, aren't we sort of, quote, no disrespect to other religions, but like buying into their thought that that statue or something has religious significance? For us, it's like we could look at something and go, okay, it's their thing, it's not my thing. But by making such an isur about going in, it's almost like we're adding and acknowledging that it has some, considered a deity or has some religious significance, as opposed to just saying, okay, it's a Salem on the wall or it's a statue or something like that, which means nothing to us other than perhaps it's beautiful.
Yeah, you raise a good point, but we're not necessarily acknowledging the validity of their beliefs, but we're acknowledging the fact that they believe that it's valid. And that could be problematic. Again, you do have poskim who say that it's not a avodah zarah. Now, they wouldn't encourage you to go into a church, but because in general, we don't want to give respect to other religions. Because again, in the 10 Commandments that we just read in Shul the other day, there are no other gods except Hashem. And we acknowledge that. And by going into a church where there are, again, you may want to go into the cloisters to look at the works of art, the beautiful works of art. However, the fact that it's used as a church would tell you that as nice as the artwork might be, it represents a concept that is alien to Judaism. Whether it's the Trinity, whether it's believing in the virgin birth and all the baggage that comes along with Christianity, which is contrary to Jewish belief. So you are, in a certain sense, not necessarily giving validity to it or acknowledging the truth of the other religion, but you're acknowledging the fact that there are people who believe it to be true. And that's contrary to Judaism. And again, the problem is, it limits. If you are into the world of art, it can be very problematic because most medieval art is Christian, and they're great, great artists. All the Italian artists, many of the Dutch painters in the Middle Ages and in early modernity, they all use Christian themes because those themes are so potentially artistically valid. There are a lot of miracles to talk about in the New Testament, and then they depict them. Now, many of the scenes are Old Testament scenes. That's fine. You want to do a picture of Daniel in the lion's den? That's wonderful. You want to draw a picture of Moses splitting the sea? Wonderful. But then you get involved in some of the saints' stories and the pictures of Jesus and the Virgin and other. Then you get into problem areas. And again, if you are into art, it's very, very problematic. When my daughter was in Barnard, she majored in art history, of all things. Nothing to do with what her career was. You need to pick it up. So for a while, she was an art history major. And when she graduated college, she and her friends took a trip through Europe. And they visited all the great museums, and they saw pictures of things they'd only seen in books before. And it was a very exciting thing for her. But most of this art is Christian art. And we can't escape from it. And there are so many, again, given the history between the Jews and the church, it's no wonder that many poskim said, stay away. The church killed millions and millions of Jews in various crusades and pogroms and other things that we should try to do our utmost to stay away from anything associated with them. That's why in the very traditional Orthodox circles, interfaith issues never come up because we don't want to even give them recognition or validity because of what they did to us throughout history. And this is true of Islam, and it's true of Christianity as well. It can be very problematic, even though you may not be discussing religious issues.
Wally,
Yes.
you say that in some churches they may have the statues, but people don't actually worship those statues. Well, what about, isn't the same would be true with a Christmas tree?
Yes.
So what do we do when there's Christmas trees all over the streets and all over everywhere else?
Well, again,
Avoid those streets.
so a Christmas tree, it's interesting. There are many so-called Christian practices are really derived from pagan practices. The Christmas tree originally came from pagan beliefs in Northern Europe. Halloween, a lot of these things are based on pagan practices, which many people themselves are not aware. You can't avoid Christmas trees. You walk into a bank, you walk into a store, but by the same token, there's a menorah sitting there too. So a Christmas tree, while it might be problematic under certain circumstances, is less objectionable than a statue of the saint. There are many people who have statues on their front lawns. Should you cross the street and not walk past that house is an interesting question. And again, it depends on how you interpret. If you hold like the Meiri and a few others, that is not avodah zarah, then it's not a problem. Because they don't believe that those statues themselves have any power. And what they represent, maybe. If you really believe that statue has power, then you are a pagan. You're really over the avodah zarah. Yes.
Yeah, my daughter gave birth. She was in Holy Name, and there was a cherubim there. So my son-in-law asked Rabbi Newberger. I think he said, you may as well stay there. But I'm saying that what do? You start an issue, a whole thing. But I don't remember which grand trial. I'll have to have less respect for that grand trial.
No, I mean, the question comes up, and in some cases they will, people try to cover it over, or you can't remove it necessarily, but you might be able to cover it. Or put a what do you call it, a curtain in front of it or something, one of those stands. It's not a major problem, a minor problem perhaps, but not a major problem. But we are surrounded by many, many different religions, and some of them are pretty bizarre. Then again, they look at us as bizarre as well. But the takeaway is if you happen to be in Italy, don't go into the Sistine Chapel. There are other museums to look at, the Prado and other things you can look at if you're interested in it. But most of this art is Christian art anyway, so it's better to avoid it. The Madonna and Jesus as an infant. I mean, but a lot of the biblical art is Old Testament art. A lot of the great artists make pictures of Shimshon and Delilah and Akedas Yitzchak, and there are a lot of, and Kriyas Yamsuf. There are a lot of very Old Testament themes in art too, but most of it is Christian in nature. And the key in how you interpret whether it's avodah zarah or not is whether you believe people actually worship the statue itself or what it represents. In either case, it's still considered, according to most Rishonim and many Achronim as well. Islam is less of a problem, except for a couple of poskim, because they do bow down. If you watch Muslim worship, they are bowing down. Now, what are they bowing down to? When we bow down, we're not bowing down to an image. We don't bow to a portrait or a statue. Muslims, when they daven 5 times a day, whether in a mosque or not in a mosque, they'll just bow down the same way, lahavdil. So they're not. So it's less of an issue for Islam than it is for Christianity. But even so, there are still some who hold that it's avodah zarah. But again, the word avodah zarah means any worship other than Judaism. Technically, is avodah zarah, strange worship. You want to get more? Then Christianity is probably fit into that category. Islam probably not. Sam, you got a question?
Yeah, no, but I'm not sure. This is not really a question. This is a comment, almost an observation from what I hear. And I could mention names of some of the rabbis. I think Rabbi Blech and Rabbi Sachs and I think Meir Soloveitchik and various rabbis, recognized Orthodox rabbis, who basically have gone into the Vatican and spoken to them and been in. I think I heard one Devar Torah about a priest from Philadelphia going up and into into where the boys learn at YU and things like that, and commenting on us, and we comment on them and things like that. It would my comment or my question or my whatever it is just seems to be that I understand what you're saying, but I think in some ways the attitude towards certain Christian groups or all Christian groups seems to be changing in many ways from the days of whatever. I'm not saying that we should worship or whatever. That's not the point. I'm just saying that the attitude of certain
Okay, well, to a certain
people.
extent, you may be correct. There was a whole big to do. A bunch of priests visited the base medrash at YU.
Right.
Very impressed about the learning that was going on. By the same token, we can't erase centuries of persecution by the Catholic Church.
Well,
I will give you two anecdotes. Anecdote number one: in England, England is Protestant. The Church of England is Protestant, and there are no statues in their church. They're very elaborate robes that they wear.
The Church of England is Anglican, and they basically just threw out the priests, but they have basically the same structure as.
Because it's an Anglican religion, several chief rabbis, including Rabbi Jacobowitz and Rabbi Sachs and Rabbi Mervis, have participated in certain quasi-religious things, because otherwise it would have been a Chilul Hashem if the chief rabbi didn't show up. So they went. Rabbi Lookstein also went to the Vatican for some issue many years ago. On the other hand, again, Protestantism is not as bad. On the other hand, I remember very clearly when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, Rav Soloveitchik made a very big point to tell all of his Talmidim, do not watch this on television, because most of it took place in the church in Boston, and that's Avodah Zarah. Do not watch the funeral of John F. Kennedy. Because
I understand that, but just
now, one last comment. The church understands that in the 20th and 21st century, their antipathy towards Judaism is not socially acceptable. I mean, there are no longer any pogroms. There are no longer forced conversions, even though Catholicism has conversion as part of its major goal. In 1967, Pope John the 23rd was a very fine man, and he tried to reverse centuries of anti-Semitism by issuing a papal encyclical, and people misinterpreted. People are under the impression that what he said was that we can't hold the Jews responsible for deicide, for killing Jesus. And everybody was so happy about it. If you read Latin and you look at the original language of the encyclical, it's not so great. What he said was, we can't blame the Jews at that time for the killing of Jesus. So the Jews at that time are not responsible. The fact that we blame the Jews for centuries, that's another story. That they didn't say that. So again, there is an attempt at modifying, because again, in modern times, it's parsnish to go out and convert Jews and to kill Jews. We don't do that. Do they really believe that we should all become Christians? Absolutely. That's part of their theology. That's part of their theology. They do not do it by telling you kiss the cross and die.
Just one other thing, Wally. Just one other comment. When the Supreme Court of the United States said that what they call prayer or whatever they called it at the time in public schools was out, the Lubavitcher Rebbe basically said he opposed that. He
Yes,
basically
yes,
wanted,
but-
he basically wanted it to include prayer. Why? What, because he was not merely as worried in the United States about what you're talking about, all of the horrible things that they did to us in Europe about happening here.
Well, because the prayer that they were
Because,
talking,
because
was
he
not-
thought that prayer, he wanted to leave the idea of God open in the schools to the individuals. He was willing to
he
accept
was-
the fact as long as the prayer was generic.
He was
But he
cor- he was
wasn't as
correct.
afraid that,
yes, the Lubavitcher
but he
Rebbe
was
was,
not,
it was a
and-
non-denominational prayer. And I
that's
remember
what I'm saying.
when
That's
when
what I'm
I
saying,
went to
but he
public
wasn't,
school, when I went to public school, every morning we began the day with the Pledge of Allegiance. And when
so did
President
I.
David Eisenhower added 2 words into the Pledge of Allegiance, one
Under
nation,
God,
God,
under God.
added that, and there was nothing wrong with it. And every morning we got up and we said the Pledge of Allegiance. Today it does. I don't think you'll find an American flag in every school anymore. I mean, it's a separate discussion. But clearly,
But that's a change in the attitude towards America
The
and
Rebbe
towards
was
patriotism.
that people need more spirituality in their lives, and non-denominational prayer is fine, no problem with it. We lack spirituality in our lives. That's what he was trying to say.
Absolutely.
In any event,
That's exact.
I think we have a lot to do about knowing more about Judaism than not to worry about Christianity or Islam, even though there may be interesting fields to study. But clearly, we should spend more time in shuls and not
Good
in
point.
churches.
Good point. Very true. You're
Okay.
right.
That's no problem with that.
30.
Any other questions?
Have a great Shabbos.
Good job. Thank
All right.
Finish
Have a-
off the cheesecake.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. Okay.
Thank you. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
Have a good Shabbos, Sam.
You too, Jules.